What's going on, Dolphins? It is your boy Dillon, and I got a couple things I want to talk about today, including some updates and additional context to the situation with the collective bargaining agreement, as well as a little bit about the combine. As I told you guys, as you guys know, unfortunately, I don't have the time and resources to do as much in-depth analysis of college players and so on and so forth as I would like. But I do want to give you some stuff, some highlights from some of like the standout players and stuff from the combine. I do want to give you a little bit because there are some players certainly to look out for the Dolphins in that regard. Obviously, we've had extensive conversations about the quarterback situation. There's a million different scenarios there that could play out, and so we'll have to wait and see. But there are tons of other holes to fill, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's get into it. We'll start off with the CBA stuff. First, there's a report on Bleacher Report, NFL heading to lockout or player strike if current CBA proposal fails. The line in the sand between the NFL and NFLPA appears to be the owner's insistence on adding a 17th game to the regular season. So again, as we've been saying, and as I've been saying, is from my perspective, this is a battle between the money, i.e. the NFL, the corporate side of the NFL, and the NFL owners versus the players, okay? And their best interest. And from my perspective, it's the owners trying to, increase the amount of money that they bring in while giving breadcrumbs to the players. But let's continue on. Peter King of NBC Sports spoke to a person on the players' side who acknowledged a work stoppage is likely if the players fail to ratify the new collective bargaining agreement that's on the table. Now again, just real quick, and we'll talk about it more as we get through this article, but this could have tremendous amount of impact on the Dolphins. Why? Because if there's a lockout next year, or if there's a shutdown of the NFL and and there's no 2021 season, well, that's a major wrench into the cogs for the Dolphins' so-called rebuilding plans. So they're already in a massively deep hole as it is. And to be fair, we have to wait and see how the players end up voting. Now, of course, I don't want to see a stoppage. I don't want to see a strike and there be no football in 2021. But as the collective bargaining agreement stands right now, I think it's definitely in the best interest of the players to not agree to this and demand more, because it doesn't give them anywhere near enough. It gives them, minor concessions, and especially in comparison to what the owners and stuff are going to make. I mean, they already make billions. Stephen Ross is a billionaire, and he makes tons of money from owning the Dolphins. And in this agreement, they're going to look to make, substantial amounts more, but they're not giving much to the players. Anyway, we'll continue on. It could have a tremendous impact, though, is at the end of the day is the point. If players vote no, it's simple. There will either be a lockout in 2021 or we will strike. We all want 16 games, and I understand that. But there is no 16-game option. If we want 16 games, we have to be prepared for a job action, the person with familiarity with the negotiations said. So understand what that means. So this person, now it's just one person, it's an anonymous person that has, some inside information, right? And there's been various reports saying different things, whatever. So again, we have to wait and see. But, I can't speak to the minds of every player, but I would guess and certainly hope that the players understand that, this is all it is a ploy. All it is a scheme for them to get richer. Not the players, but the NFL and the owners in particular, right? And so it's not worth it for them at all. And they need to make sure that they stand up for it. But it could end up with there being no football in 2021. Anyway, continuing on. NFL owners have already voted in favor of the new 10-year agreement. And that's another major part of it, though, too, that needs to be taken into account. Not only does this not really give them much of anything, the players, it gives them scraps, but then they can't even do another collective bargaining agreement for 10 years. So then they'll just have to live with it. And the amount of, they say that they're going to give the players like 48% of the revenue, which I find inconceivable. I can't imagine that the NFL and the owners are going to ever would ever want to give the players almost half of the revenue that they bring in. Okay, so I don't believe that to begin with. But even if that was the case, it would be over 10 years. And after things like inflation and so on and so forth, and then especially in comparison to the amount of money that they will be bringing in, because they said that it should amount to like $5 billion over 10 years. Well, that's $5 billion over 10 years over the course of all of those different players, right? There's like 3,000 some odd players. And then what about players that come into the league 8 years from now, right? Or what about players that get out of the league in 2 or 3 years from now, right? So it's a terrible agreement for the players, and they really need to stand up for more, especially considering they can't renegotiate again, at least theoretically, for another 10 years. Anyway, so the NFL owners have already, signed on to it. We already know that because they're greedy sacks of shit and they don't give a fuck about the players. They only care about raking in. They want to be trillionaires. Like literally, they're not happy with being billionaires. They want to be trillionaires, and so they're trying as hard as they can, which would give the league an option to add an extra week to the regular season. Which, little side note, they also love their tax cuts, and that's one of the reasons why I am not a fan of Stephen Ross anymore, because he is a Trump fan, and because all he cares about is getting those tax cuts from that racist, bigoted asshole that we have as a president. And that's why I disagreed with how he and Brian Flores handled the Kenny Stills situation, etc., etc. Anyway, continuing on. The NFLPA Executive Committee voted, and this is some good clarification too, by the way. The NFL, my previous reporting, the NFLPA Executive Committee had voted against it 6-5, recommending the proposal, or voted against recommending the proposal 6-5. But the player reps voted 17-14 with one abstention, or somebody who, voted present basically, or didn't want to vote, whatever. Voted neutral, or I don't know, however you want to say it, to send the proposal to players for a union-wide approval. So now it's going to the entire group of players that are in the NFLPA, right? So the executive committee voted against it, but the player reps voted for it, along with, of course, the owners. More than half of the league's constituency has to vote in favor of the CBA for it to be approved. So more than half, I don't know exactly what the percentage is, it doesn't say here, but more than half need to vote in favor of it. King noted that ownership has decided it will only move forward with a CBA that includes a 17th regular season game and 2 additional wild card matchups. So that's huge too, and that proves even further. The owners are being like, nope, you guys got to agree to this. That's it. Period. Now, we'll see if they still want to hold that, tough guy stance when there's not going to be any football next year, if that's what it comes to. If the 2020 season is coming to a close and there's still no agreement, then they might change their tune. But, I mean, the players need a lot more in this agreement for it to be, adequate. The league plans to use those new games in broadcast rights negotiations with hopes of massively expanding the revenue pool. Okay, now it shouldn't be any surprise to anybody, but that's what it's all about. The league, let me read that again. The league plans to use those new games in broadcast rights negotiations. So that means advertisers are going to be involved and all this other bullshit, right? to with hopes of massively expanding the revenue pool. We also know that they're branching out and playing a lot more games overseas, right? Because it's all about making them more and more and more money. Anyway, player pushback on the deal has largely focused on the 17th game, with many focusing on safety issues. Now, I've told you about, Aaron Rodgers and J.J. Watt and a bunch of other players. Well, here's Richard Sherman. Health and wellness of our men is always the most important aspect, Richard Sherman tweeted. There's no price you can put on that, and that is why I voted no. I respect the men that have been part of this discussion and stood up for their locker rooms. The current collective bargaining agreement runs through March 2021. Dan Graziano and Jeremy Fowler of ESPN noted owners would probably pull back on the agreement and wait until next offseason if players refuse to approve the new deal. I mean, if that happens, which that's the thing, once the actual season starts, it's probably pretty unlikely that a deal will get agreed upon, because then it's going to be focused on the season. So between now, so really, there's only probably a couple months or so of legit time where we can expect this to happen. Otherwise, it probably won't happen until the next offseason. But if that's the case, then there's a substantial possibility that there could end up being a lockout and no football in 2021. And then imagine what happens to the Dolphins' rebuilding plan, especially if they do what I expect that they're going to do, or project that they're going to do, trade away a bunch of draft capital to go chase a quarterback, especially then if they end up taking Tua Tagovailoa after being big spenders in free agency and blowing through their cap space to, inadequately fix the offensive line, and then worst case scenario, throw him into the fire right away and get him pummeled behind a non-existent offensive line with no run game, etc. So, I mean, if they do all that, now, I think they're going to trade up to the number 3 spot and take Tua. I don't know at this point. I haven't decided yet on whether I think they're stupid enough to just throw him into the fire. We're going to have to wait and see how his medicals check out going forward and how his pro day goes. And then if they take him at all, and then see what they say in training camp. And then I'll make my decision then once if they take him and then in training camp, it's glowing praise, then I can see them absolutely throwing him in the fire right away. So we'll have to wait and see. But if they do all of that and then he ends up getting hurt and then we end up having like a lockout in 2021, I mean, it's disaster. Anyway, it would create a situation wherein both sides are playing chicken, similar to the 2011 lockout. Neither the owners nor the players want to miss any actual games. The owners are motivated to get a deal done so they can provide a united front to television partners who would be more likely to break the bank in negotiations and if the NFL can guarantee labor peace. So we'll see. And that's, of course, too, obviously, the players, it's their jobs on the line, etc., etc. But it's like anything else, like the teacher strikes or whatever. And there was a lockout in 2011, right? So it's not like it's never happened before, and it certainly could happen again. I definitely, like I said, and my final piece on this for now until there's more updates is I think that as the CBA stands right now, the players should absolutely disapprove of it and say, no, we want a lot more. Because at the end of the day, their health and what, and all of that, their side of it and what they're asking for is a much higher priority than just the pocketbooks of the NFL owners. I don't give two fucks about how many more billions of dollars that they want. They can make sure that the players are healthy and have all of the safeties in place. They need to be doing more for innovation to make the game safer. They need to, fix the game in the rule book and clean it up a lot, and, but there's still a long way because they're still in, being run by greedy assholes. So But I think the players should disapprove of the CBA and continue to fight for more. And we'll just have to wait and see what happens. But luckily, though, I expect Bernie Sanders to get elected as president, and then hopefully there will end up being change, broad, sweeping change in this country overall that will help to push, things in the right direction as far as the NFL and the CBA goes. And then hopefully we will be able to, see a deal materialize in which the players actually get, legit concessions instead of the bullshit that they've been given. Including, scrapping this bullshit idea of doing another fucking regular season game, etc. I think it's stupid personally. Anyway, so let's move on to the next part though, because I do want to talk a little bit about the combine and what's going on there. So like I said, unfortunately I don't have the time or the resources to put as much into, scouting of all of these players. So I just pulled this article that talks about some of the early standouts at the 2020 NFL Combine. And they highlight 8 players, most of which, or maybe none of which, will end up on the Dolphins depending on what they do. But there are a couple offensive tackles, there's some wide receivers, a running back, and some players of interest definitely to look at. So let's just get through this, and we'll discuss as we go. The NFL Scouting Combine format differed from years past. Instead of early morning workouts, prospects ran the 40-yard dash and went through position drills during the evening. According to Bleacher Report's Matt Miller, some of the top draft hopefuls chose to sit out with the advice from agents because of the time shift. Others chose to participate. Special teamers and offensive players took the field Thursday and Friday, leaving the defense for the weekend. Focusing only on the offense, more than a few prospects likely made some money on the first 2 days of workouts. Typically, draft boards are tentatively set, but an impressive performance can cause some movement or encourage scouts to take another look at game tapes. This year's draft class features a strong set of wide receivers and offensive linemen. Those position groups didn't disappoint with all eyes on them. A few players broke records, adding shine to their on-field job interviews. Real quick though, so they note that wide receivers and offensive linemen are deep in this draft, which, as far as I'm concerned, the entire team needs boosting, right? We have holes across the board, but I would say that on offense, wide receiver is probably the area that we are deepest at. So I'm not really in favor of taking a wide receiver. As I've told you guys before, the way I would do the draft is I would take an offensive lineman for sure in the first round. Maybe one of the offensive linemen that we're going to talk about in a minute. I would also take a defensive lineman. Best player available plays into this a little bit as well, of course, depending on how the board falls. But I would take an offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, and then a skill position player at a position of need. So like maybe running back or cornerback or safety. Those would be good positions, right? And that's how I would use our 3 first-round picks. Again, my guess is they're going to end up trading away substantial draft capital to move up in the draft, most likely to the number 3 spot with the Detroit Lions to take Tua Tagovailoa. And they have also said that they are going to be big spenders in free agency, and I'm expecting that they are going to expect to spend big on the offensive line in free agency, and then will likely neglect the offensive line or do very little to address the offensive line through the draft, and instead chase some other stuff, including a quarterback, whatever. But we'll have to wait and see. So let's continue on. At the very least, though, one of my fears is that they're gonna miss on some of the top talent for sure on the offensive line. I don't care if we miss on the top talent at wide receiver. Because I think that's the deepest position group we have, maybe on the entire team, but certainly on the offense. But my fear is that just like last year, instead of taking Garrett Bradbury and having your center of the future, they decided to wait until round 3 to pick up the terrible Michael Dieter. He was trash last year. Now, to be fair, he certainly could improve, and we'll have to wait and see if that happens. But they waited until round 3 last year when they could have gotten one of the top offensive lineman in the draft, and look how that turned out. He was garbage. So I fear that they're going to do something similar to that again this year, neglect it, and then end up picking up guys that probably, you know, are big spenders in free agency that will blow through the cap space and then end up probably not even actually being on the team in a couple years after that. Especially if there ends up being a lockout, because then they'll be 1 year older, etc., etc., etc. And those guys that they're going to get in free agency are likely going to be through, you know, somewhere in their mid to later, you know, late 20s as is. So, I mean, it's just setting up for a lot of disaster, but it depends on what they actually do, to be fair, so we still have to wait and see. But it's coming up quick. Free agency is literally about to hit, so we should start seeing a lot of transactions and see what the Dolphins actually do in free agency. That will be a big teller on then what they will end up doing in the draft. So I am super anxious and excited, to some degree for sure, to see what it is that they do in the offseason here once free agency hits. Those position groups didn't disappoint. Yeah, okay, let's see. Let's take a look at 8 players who separated from the pack while most prospects fared well. A smaller group stood out among the rest at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. Okay, quarterback Jalen Hurts, Oklahoma. Jalen Hurts didn't participate in wide receiver drills, but he did show off his athleticism. The Oklahoma clocked the second fastest 40-yard dash among quarterbacks with a 4.59. Perhaps viewers over-exaggerate the importance of the 40-yard dash in terms of translation to actual game situations, but Hurts needed to display top-end speed to underscore the threat of his legs. According to Next Gen Stats, Hurts' athleticism compares to that of Los Angeles Chargers quarterback Tyrod Taylor, who the Dolphins know very well, and he's always given us problems, Tyrod Taylor has. Hurts had some pinpoint throws during the passing drills. According to NFL Network's Daniel Jeremiah, the dual threat signal caller displayed solid footwork, setting himself up for those accurate darts to unfamiliar pass catchers. We saw the athlete that he is, and you see him throw the football, Jeremiah said. The ball is live. It jumps out of his hand, and watching him go through the drop right here, I think his feet, when you stack him up with the rest of the guys up there, looks pretty good. Hurts had a one-on-one X's and O's board session with NFL Network's Steve Mariucci. The near 4-minute segment showcased his football IQ, the ability to absorb, digest, and communicate pro-level language. That's an overlooked but important trait in the transition from college, which is absolutely true. As the quarterback position evolves with more athletic playmakers under center, Hurts should find an NFL home between pick number 50 and 80 in April. Okay, so just there you go. Real quick, I want to note. So it's likely that the Dolphins end up trading up to get a guy like Tua, who, you know, may or may not end up being the Dolphins' long-term guy. Or they could not take a quarterback in the first round. I mean, pick number 50 to 80 puts Jalen Hurts somewhere in round 2 to round 3. Now, I would take a quarterback. You know me, I wouldn't take a quarterback in round 1 or 2. I would take a quarterback every year in round 3 or later, depending on how much you need one. But if Jalen Hurts made it to round 3, or, you know, even, you know, the bottom of round 2 or whatever, and you could get him there and get, you know, one of the top offensive linemen, you know, or maybe 2 of the draft's offensive linemen, or an offensive lineman, a running back, and a defensive lineman, or, you know, maybe a safety, whatever, then okay, now you're shaping up to have a pretty solid draft. You get one of the top offensive linemen, one of the top defensive linemen, and one of the draft's top, you know, running backs, corners, or safeties with your 3 first-round picks, and then pick up Jalen Hurts maybe at the back end of round 2, or if he falls into round 3. Look, now you're actually shaping up to have a really good fucking draft, if that's what they do. Continuing on, running back Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin. Jonathan Taylor may have moved up several spots on big boards. And now, of course, again, we need a running back, so this is maybe a guy to look at. Taylor has the gaudy collegiate numbers, racking up at least 1,977 rushing yards in each of his 3 terms at Wisconsin. He also won the Doak Walker Award as the most outstanding running back from the 2018 and 2019 campaigns. As the icing on the cake, the 5'10", 226-pound tailback put on a show with his speed and pass-catching ability Friday. Taylor ran a 4.39 40 logging the fastest mark within his position group. He followed that up with clean receptions in the on-field drills, hauling in passes on option and flare routes. In his first 2 years on the collegiate level, Taylor caught a combined 16 passes for 155 yards. In his past term alone, he registered 26 receptions for 252 yards and 5 touchdowns. So this is a guy who is a dual threat and who showed to improve in his pass catching ability. He needed a solid performance as a receiver to show continued development in that aspect of his game. Now, the only thing that you would want to know about him is whether or not he's able to block. In today's league, running backs can provide a significant boost to passing attacks. Taylor has shown he's more than a potential 2-down tailback. In open space as a ball carrier or pass catcher, Taylor can turn on the burners for chunk plays. So maybe he's a guy to look at. Next, wide receiver Chase Claypool from Notre Dame. Now again, wide receiver, I think there's like 3 of them in here. But I wouldn't personally take any of them, but you never know what the Dolphins are going to do, so let's go through it. Chase Claypool measured 6'4", 238 pounds, which may prompt teams to experiment with him at tight end. At the Combine, Bleacher Report's Matt Miller talked to a scout about the prospect's possible position switch. But then again, if they wanted to take him and switch him to tight end, maybe it's a possibility. Scouts were already talking about a potential move to tight end for Notre Dame wide receiver Chase Claypool, but after weighing in at 238 pounds, the talk is heating up. Miller tweeted, yet Claypool ran like a wide receiver Thursday, clocking a 4.42 40. He finished 7th at the position, but that doesn't tell the whole story. According to NFL research, Claypool and Calvin Johnson are the only wide receivers who stood at least 6'4", 235 pounds and ran a sub 4.45 40. Claypool possesses the athleticism that will encourage scouts to pound the table for him leading up to the draft. He also logged the 4th best vertical at 40.5 inches among this year's wideouts. So he ran like a wide receiver, but he's got the big body and frame to be a tight end. So that is an intriguing prospect and could potentially be a pickup for the Dolphins, although he's likely to go earlier on in the draft. And so maybe he doesn't, because it's not the biggest position of need. And we have certainly a running back would be better to take if you were going to take a first round running back. Wide receiver Justin Jefferson, LSU. Justin Jefferson produced a breakout junior campaign on a title-winning squad at LSU this past season, registering 111 receptions, 1,540 yards, and 18 touchdowns. Still, he went into Thursday's workout circuit with minor questions about his speed. He quickly put those concerns to rest with an impressive 4.43 40. As NFL Network's Daniel Jeremiah started to talk about speed as a whole in Jefferson's game, the 6'1", 202-pound wide receiver blazed the track. That is huge, Jeremiah said. That's the most important time that we've seen today. He's a great player on tape, and now you've got some big-time legitimate speed on record to back it up. Jefferson may have teetered between late first round and early second round territory. After the Combine, teams may take another look at LSU's game tapes, focusing on the wide receiver's quickness and agility before setting a spot for him on the draft board. Consistent with his collegiate tape, Jefferson flashed solid pass-catching skills while in motion during the gauntlet drill. He strictly used his hands without straying away from the ball to reel in passes. Jefferson caught passes from Joe Burrow, the presumptive number 1 overall pick this past term, but he possesses traits, quickness, and sure hands that should translate to the pros with any quarterback. Let's also note, though, that some of these guys are notable to the Dolphins indirectly because it does influence all teams' draft boards and then will eventually affect how players are plucked off boards when draft day actually comes around. And, crazy things happen and things get shook up. There's run on position groups. There's runs on position groups all the time. It makes players fall where you would have thought they would have gone higher, etc., etc. So that kind of stuff happens a lot. All right. Next, wide receiver Henry Ruggs III from Alabama. Henry Ruggs III didn't participate in the position drills, but we would be remiss to omit his 40-yard dash time, which stood out as the fastest mark of the day at 4.27, which is super quick. Ruggs seemed disappointed, but not entirely because of his thigh injury. He aimed to break Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver John Ross's record of 4.22 set in 2017. My goal is to be the fastest ever, Ruggs said to Danny Cannell of CBS Sports when asked about his goal for the 40. Although Ruggs fell short of his ambitious goal, he's still the top blazer in this class and has a good chance at going in the top 15 on draft day. Hence why I said some of this is actually important, because it will help to shake out, you know, how the draft actually falls and who will be available to the Dolphins. But look, that's the thing. If the Dolphins, let's say they did end up trading up to the number 1 spot because they are that desperate and want to make sure that they get whoever it is that they covet, then, and maybe it is Joe Burrow, then, and to do so, they end up having to trade away all of their first round picks this year. That'd be 5, 18, and 26. Well, you know, if we stayed with those picks, maybe because of how, you know, the wide receiver group plays out, or where Henry Ruggs gets picked, maybe at 18 there would be a player there for us that, you know, we weren't expecting to be there, right? But we miss out on that opportunity because we trade that away to go up. Or even if we go up to the number 3 spot, that could involve the 5th and 18th pick. So it's, you know, these things are consequential. The Alabama product has drawn comparisons to Kansas City Chiefs wideout Tyreek Hill. The 21-year-old certainly checked the box next to speed, but we didn't see his pass-catching ability on display. Ruggs will have an opportunity to showcase his hands during Alabama's Pro Day on March 9th, assuming his injury isn't serious. In addition to wide receiver duties, Ruggs could be effective on jet sweeps, handoffs in the backfield, and on kick returns because of his explosiveness. Among this year's wideouts, he recorded top 5 marks from the broad jump, 131, nice, and vertical jump, 42 inches, also nice. Ruggs' ability and pass-catching skills suggest he's a big play receiver with tremendous upside. Next, tight end Albert Okwegbunam. I'm sorry about butchering your name, guy. I'm so sorry about that. He's a tight end. Again, a position group that you might not, for the Dolphins, might not want to take necessarily in the first round, but it is a position that does need to be addressed. Albert, I'm not going to say his name again, went into the combine as one of the lesser known prospects. He quickly made a name for himself with the fastest 40-yard dash time of 4.49 among tight ends, which also tied for 4th at the position since 2003. His athletic score, 99, via Next Gen Stats classifies as elite, underscoring his impressive performance Thursday evening. Taking a closer look at the former Tigers outing, he was from Missouri. Missouri. He had a smooth showing in the pass-catching gauntlet drill. With tight ends contributing more to passing attacks, teams will covet Albert's size at 6'5", 258 pounds, and speed combination. At Missouri, he racked up 98 catches for 1,187 yards and 23 touchdowns through 3 terms. Also immediately, he will draw comparisons to New York Giants tight end Evan Ingram, who ran a 4.42 40 time during the 2017 Combine. The latter took on a role as a high-volume pass-catching tight end with getaway speed. This year's tight end class doesn't feature a star prospect, but has depth with Cole Met, Bryson Hopkins, and Hunter Bryant, all turning in solid Combine performances after decent campaigns with their respective collegiate programs. Albert will probably come off the board on day 2 of the draft. He may have boosted his stock a bit after a strong showing in Indianapolis. Alright, and now the last 2 prospects are a couple offensive tackles that could be in play for the Dolphins, but it depends on what they end up doing. And so I would personally like to take one of these guys instead of chasing a quarterback, but we'll see how it goes. First up is offensive tackle Tristan Wirfs from Iowa. Tristan Wirfs stood out among his peers with record numbers for an offensive lineman. See, and that's the thing, man, is I would so much rather take him instead of like chasing Tua or whatever, and then missing out on, you know, some of the top fucking offensive, because that's the weakest position group on the entire team. And it doesn't matter who you put back there, especially if you end up throwing in, you know, Tua behind an offensive line that is not adequate, and Anyway, I mean, it's just, there's so much that could potentially go wrong, and I would so love to have a guy like this. Record-setting numbers for an offensive lineman in the combine. He logged a 36.5-inch vertical, which is the best of any prospect at the position, and 121 inches on the broad jump. Wow, that is really impressive for a big dude. Tying Colton Miller in 2018 for the top distance among tackles, guards, and centers. Wirfs continued to show explosiveness and bend throughout the evening. He clocked the fastest 40-yard dash time for this year's offensive lineman at 4.85. That's really impressive. Actually, sub 5, but it's a 4.85. That is really impressive for an offensive lineman. The athletic tackle looked like a dancing bear during the on-field drills, moving his feet with a wide base while excelling in the wave drill, which goes to show, which would indicate that he would be good on the move and could help, block downfield and really help to open up the run game. The Iowa product moved and also be really good against speed rushers, which would be tremendous. The Iowa product moved fluidly in the pull exercise, which could translate to functional run blocking for a ground attack. Coming into the draft, Wirfs' agility may have been a bit understated because of his above-average technique stemming from a wrestling background. He'll force teams to look back at his tape because of his gaudy workout numbers and nimble feet at 6'5", 320 pounds. Wow. Wirfs solidified himself as a blue-chip offensive lineman in his class. He's a probable top 15 pick. I mean, the Dolphins could get this guy, but my fear is that they're going to be stupid. And I mean, even if they trade up to the number 3 spot and do have to get rid of even just the number 5 overall pick, which they will certainly have to get rid of, then, I mean, none of the, neither him nor the next guy we talk about could even be available at 15, or Andrew Thomas, the other top offensive lineman that everybody's talking about. Maybe none of them are available at 18, and maybe we just miss out on all the top offensive linemen. That's a big fear of mine. Anyway, so the last one is offensive tackle Mekhi Becton from Louisville. Mekhi Becton ran the 40-yard dash but missed most of the position drills because of a hamstring injury. Yet he made a huge statement with his time at 5'1". So see, this guy ran 5'1", above 5, which is still a pretty good 40 time for an offensive lineman. But that's why fucking Tristan Wirfs running it at 4.85 is just insanity. Anyway, with a 1.77 second 10-yard split. For offensive linemen, it's important to highlight the 10-yard split because it measures the first steps for a 300-plus pounder asked to mirror quick-footed pass rushers, both on the interior and perimeter. At 6'7", 364 pounds, Becton can quickly go into his pass protection stance and wall off edge rushers who are looking to gain a step around the corner. Because of the Louisville product's size, most defenders may attempt to beat him with quickness rather than power. With a little explosiveness out of the snap, Becton will pose major issues for defensive linemen around the league. He seemed to impress Las Vegas Raiders general manager Mike Mayock, who doesn't need a first-round tackle. Expect teams looking for help in the trenches to target the massive offensive lineman within the top 10. And again, so a top offensive line talent the Dolphins could have, and it, or it could help to shape how the board ends up falling, and then, who ends up being available to us, later. Anyway, so that's what I got for you guys. Some good news and updates there for you. Some prospects to look out for in the draft that is fast approaching. But of course, the next major thing that we are going to be looking at is free agency, to get a better idea of what this Dolphins team is going to try and do, in the draft, and then see who it is that they pick up, So that is literally around the corner, so we won't have to wait too long before we start getting news on transactions and pickups that the Dolphins do. So be looking out for that. Obviously, I'll be covering it and making videos, so keep an eye out. And with that, guys, I'm going to get up out of here. I hope you guys enjoy my videos and perspective. If you do, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you hit the bell if you want to get the alerts. Share my channel and videos with your friends and family. Leave your questions, comments, and concerns down in the comment section. And of course, as always, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Dillon Tartaro. And with that, I am out. I'll see y'all soon. Phins up.